My name is Declan, and I am 34 years old. For the past decade, I have worked brutal, back-breaking shifts in commercial kitchens to build a modest career as a chef, pouring my soul into a profession my family openly mocked. But the most defining moment of my entire life, the moment that shattered every illusion I had about blood and loyalty, happened exactly 2 years ago on my grandmother's 79th birthday. While my grandmother was sitting completely alone in her quiet kitchen wearing her best Sunday dress, my parents dropped a frozen microwave dinner on her table, told her they were in a massive rush, and hopped on a first-class flight to Aspen for my golden child brother's engagement party. They left her there like she was an old piece of furniture they forgot to cover up for the winter. But there was one massive thing my parents did not know. My grandmother had a secret weapon, a brilliant legal maneuver she had been quietly preparing for a very long time behind their backs. And by the end of the story, the same parents who abandoned her were publicly humiliated, stripped of their power, and begging for a piece of the pie they had so carelessly thrown away. Before I tell you exactly how I made them regret it, hit that like button if you believe that family loyalty should be earned through actions, not demanded by titles. And let me know what city or state you are watching from in the comments below, because I know this kind of family betrayal happens everywhere. Now, let's go back to the morning this all started. It was a Tuesday in the middle of March. I was elbow-deep in prep work at the restaurant where I run the kitchen in downtown Columbus. The morning rush was approaching. The stainless steel prep tables were covered in root vegetables, and the air was thick with the smell of roasting bones for stock. I was exhausted, having worked a double shift the day before, but a kitchen does not care if you are tired. Right as I was breaking down a side of beef, my phone vibrated aggressively against the metal table. It was the family group chat. I normally mute it, but for some reason, I wiped my hands on a towel and unlocked the screen. 6 messages came through in rapid, chaotic succession. My mother, Brenda, posted a high-resolution photo of a boarding gate at the international airport, her designer luggage perfectly framed in the shot. My father, Richard, posted a picture of himself holding a mimosa in the exclusive airport lounge, wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than my monthly rent. My younger brother, Preston, posted a photo of snowy mountains with 3 heart emojis, bragging about the VIP treatment at the ski resort. Then came a private text. It was not in the group chat. It was directly from my mother to me. It read, "We left Grandma a dinner. Do not make a thing of it." I stood there in the noisy kitchen and read the text twice. The sheer audacity of those words hit me like a physical blow. Do not make a thing of it. As if a woman's 79th birthday was just a minor inconvenience on the way to a luxury vacation. They had planned this Aspen trip for 6 months, making sure it conveniently overlapped with her birthday so they would not have to deal with the obligation of celebrating her. I felt a hot, sharp anger rise in my chest. I took off my heavy canvas apron, folded it neatly, and told my sous chef I was leaving and would be back for the dinner service. I walked out the back door into the cold March air, got into my beat-up sedan, and drove the 40 miles to my grandmother Clara's house. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned completely white. My grandmother lived in a small, weathered house right behind the diner she and my grandfather used to run. For over 30 years, that diner fed half the county. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, the front door was unlocked. It was always unlocked. I walked into the kitchen and stopped dead in my tracks, my heart sinking into my stomach. Right in the center of the wooden dining table, a table that had hosted decades of loud, joyful family Thanksgiving dinners and Sunday roasts, sat a cardboard box. A generic, store-bought frozen Salisbury steak dinner. It was still cold to the touch. They had not even bothered to heat it up or put it on a plate. Stuck to the top of the frozen box was the grocery store receipt. A chef looks at everything, and I immediately looked at the timestamp. 7:52 in the morning. They had been in her house at 8 in the morning, dropped a frozen block of sodium and preservatives on her table, and by 10 o'clock they were drinking mimosas at the gate, posting photos for their country club friends to like. Next to the box was a cheap, glittery birthday card signed with 2 hasty scribbles, the kind you buy at a gas station on the way to somewhere more important. My grandmother was standing by the sink, staring out the window at the empty driveway. She was wearing her good navy blue dress, the one with the pearl buttons she usually saved for a wedding or a funeral. She looked at me, then looked down at the frozen box on the table. "It is fine," she said quietly, her voice thin. "They are very busy people. They have important things to do." She glanced at the clock on the stove, her hands slightly trembling. I knew that tremble. It was not age. It was a lifetime of holding back tears so other people would not feel uncomfortable. She was making excuses for the people who had just shattered her heart. I looked at the frozen box, and I made a decision that would change the trajectory of our entire family. I picked up the box, threw it directly into the trash can, and told her we were going to do her birthday properly. I opened her fridge and found half a bakery cake. She had bought her own birthday cake expecting company. That specific detail still makes my chest tight with rage. I found a box of old candles in her junk drawer. Then, I tied on one of my grandfather's old aprons, turned on the stove, and I started cooking. I made her signature dish: chicken, rich dark gravy, and buttermilk biscuits from scratch. I made it entirely from memory because she was the exact person who taught me how to hold a knife when I was 9 years old. The house slowly started to smell like real butter, roasted garlic, and the warmth of a proper home. She sat at the table watching me move around her kitchen. For a brief moment, the heavy sadness in her eyes lifted, replaced by a quiet pride. We sat down, we ate, and I lit the candles on her half-cake. I told her to make a real wish. She blew them out and said she had already made her wish come true, and that I would understand soon enough. I thought she was just being sweet. After dinner, she went to the old oak hutch in the dining room and unlocked the bottom drawer. She pulled out a faded blue notebook. Every single cook in our town knew about that notebook. It held every recipe, every margin note, every secret that made her diner a local institution. She placed her hand flat on the worn cover, tracing the edges. "Everything I am is in here," she told me, her voice suddenly very steady. "And not everyone deserves it." Then, completely out of nowhere, she started to cry. Not loud sobbing, just silent tears rolling down a face that had spent nearly 8 decades staying strong for a deeply ungrateful family. I reached across the table and held her hand tightly. She wiped her face and looked me dead in the eye. "I am not crying because they left, Declan. I am crying because you came. Stay the night in the guest room. Someone is coming in the morning for the thing I have been waiting to finish." I slept terribly that night, listening to the old pipes settle and wondering what she meant. At exactly 8 the next morning, a black corporate sedan pulled into the driveway. 2 men in expensive, tailored suits got out. I met them at the door, blocking the entrance out of protective instinct. The younger one introduced himself as Harrison from Ashford Foods, a massive national grocery conglomerate. The older man was Vaughn, his corporate lawyer. They walked into the kitchen, greeted my grandmother with immense respect, and set a massive folder on the table. Ashford Foods was not buying the diner. They were buying the licensing rights to the Bluebird brand and my grandmother's proprietary recipes for a nationwide retail line. Harrison casually mentioned the financial terms: $2.8 million upfront, a royalty structure that could push the total valuation near $4 million over the next decade. My grandmother did not blink at the numbers. She just nodded, as if they were discussing the weather. Vaughn opened the contract to the final page and handed her a premium pen. Then he looked directly at me. "You should sit down for this, young man," he said, tapping a specific clause on the paper. "It concerns you more than you think." My grandmother touched the second page of the contract. It had my full legal name printed in bold letters: Custodian of Recipes. She had mandated a non-negotiable condition of the sale. Ashford could only use her name and recipes if I was permanently retained as the final quality control and brand director. I was being given a massive corporate salary, full health benefits, and absolute veto power over any product that carried her name. "I taught you with my hands," she said, looking at me. "Preston can sell things, but you make things real. You are the keeper of this legacy. It belongs to you now." I was completely stunned. I could not speak. But my shock was aggressively interrupted by my phone vibrating on the table. It was a screenshot forwarded to the family group chat by my mother. Loretta, the notoriously nosy neighbor, had texted my parents a picture of the men in suits entering the house, asking if Clara was selling the property. The countdown had started. The storm was coming, and my parents were about to lose their minds. To fully grasp the absolute, unhinged panic that was about to rip through my family, you have to understand the cruel arithmetic of my childhood. I was born into a family that treated me as a utility, a backup generator, while my brother Preston was treated as a blue-chip investment. My grandfather Earl opened the diner in 1990. He and my grandmother worked 18-hour days, standing over hot grease and dealing with broken dishwashers to build a comfortable life. But my father, Richard, hated the diner with a burning passion. He hated the smell of fried food that lingered on his clothes. He hated being known around town as the local cook's kid. As soon as he could, he ran from it. He wanted to be white-collar, country club adjacent, and entirely untouchable. He married my mother, Brenda, a woman who shared his deep, unsettling obsession with social status and outward appearances. They spent their entire adult lives trying to pretend they came from generational wealth instead of working-class grit. When Preston was born, he was their golden ticket. He was loud, charming, played junior golf by age 10, and schmoozed adults like a seasoned politician. I was quiet. I liked being in the kitchen. I liked working with my hands and understanding how things were made. The division of labor in our family became painfully clear very early on. When Preston needed a new car for high school, they dipped heavily into their savings to buy him a luxury sedan, so he would look good pulling into the student lot. When I needed a car, I took extra weekend shifts washing dishes at a local diner just to afford a rusted-out hatchback. The most glaring, unforgivable evidence of this dynamic was the college fund. For years, I was told there was a joint account meant to help both of us get through school without crushing debt. But when it came time for me to apply to a respected culinary institute, my father sat me down in his immaculate home office and explained that culinary school was not a real education. He looked me in the eye and said Preston's business degree at a prestigious private university required the entire fund, and that I should just get a job at a local chain restaurant if I wanted to flip burgers so badly. I did not yell. I did not fight him. I took out massive student loans and worked 2 jobs simultaneously, sleeping 4 hours a night for 3 years. When I finally graduated from culinary school, I walked across the stage holding my degree and looked out into the audience. My parents were not there. They had skipped my graduation entirely to attend Preston's amateur intramural tennis tournament 2 states away. I never threw a fit about it. I just accepted my designated role. I was the emergency contact, the fixer. When my parents went on a 3-week luxury cruise and the diner's industrial water heater exploded, flooding the basement, they did not handle it. They called me to deal with the plumber, the insurance, and the cleanup. When my grandmother needed delicate cataract surgery and was terrified of the procedure, I was the one sitting in the cold, beige waiting room for 6 hours, holding her coat and signing the discharge papers. I was the reliable one, the invisible one, the only person who truly saw me, who recognized the quiet work I was putting into my life, was Clara. I spent almost every single Sunday in her kitchen. While my parents took Preston to elite networking brunches and real estate seminars, she taught me how to break down a whole chicken without wasting an ounce of meat. She taught me how to balance acid and fat, how to sense when bread dough was perfectly proofed just by touching it. She let me read the Blue Notebook. That notebook was legendary in our county. It was not just a collection of recipes. It was a historical document of our family's survival. The margins were filled with notes, dates, and corrections. It held the exact formula for the gravy that people drove 3 towns over to eat every Sunday morning. To my father, however, that book was nothing but a cash cow waiting to be slaughtered. He had spent years talking down to my grandmother, calling her business a quaint little hobby, constantly suggesting she let him manage her assets because she was getting too old to handle her own finances. He wanted total control of her real estate portfolio and her intellectual property. He just needed her to be weak enough or confused enough to hand it over willingly. Sitting at the kitchen table that morning, looking at the multi-million-dollar contract Ashford Foods had just presented, the puzzle pieces finally snapped perfectly into place. My grandmother had spent years quietly watching my parents dismiss her. She watched them use me as a pack mule while elevating Preston. And behind her quiet, sweet grandmotherly smile, she had been plotting an absolute masterclass in wealth distribution and justice. She bypassed my father entirely. She bypassed the golden child. She anchored her entire legacy, and the financial windfall that came with it, to the one person who actually respected the work and respected her. Harrison and Vaughn packed up their briefcases, their expressions highly professional but radiating satisfaction. The ink was dry. The deal was legally binding. They promised to return in exactly 1 month to host a massive homecoming event in our town to publicly launch the brand. After they left, closing the front door softly behind them, I looked at my grandmother. She was calmly standing at the sink, washing her coffee cup with warm water and soap, utterly unbothered by the millions of dollars that had just changed hands. "They know," I told her, holding up my phone. The family group chat was exploding with a level of toxicity I had never seen. My mother was sending rapid-fire question marks and demanding answers. My father was calling my phone back to back, but I let it ring, watching his name flash on the screen. "I know they know," my grandmother said, drying her hands meticulously on a cotton towel. "I booked this corporate meeting on the one day I knew to an absolute certainty they would be 1,500 miles away, drinking champagne and celebrating themselves. Let them panic, Declan. People show you exactly who they are when they realize they are no longer in control of the money." She was entirely right. The frantic texts quickly turned into aggressive voicemails. My father left a highly volatile message demanding to know what kind of scam artists I had brought into his mother's house while he was away. He called the Ashford executive scam artists simply because he was absolutely furious he was not the one brokering the deal and taking a massive cut. I spent the rest of the day helping her organize her pantry, replacing old spices and wiping down shelves, completely ignoring the phone. The peace in that house was deep and profoundly satisfying. But it was the calm before a very ugly, very loud storm. Late that afternoon, the aggressive sound of a high-performance engine broke the quiet suburban silence. I looked out the kitchen window. A sleek, rented Porsche SUV came tearing up the driveway, kicking up gravel and stopping inches from the porch. The heavy doors flew open. My father and mother stepped out, still wearing their expensive Aspen ski resort casual wear. They had literally abandoned the engagement party, bought emergency premium tickets, and flown across the country because they smelled money moving permanently out of their reach. The front door slammed open against the wall with such force the glass panes rattled. Richard did not knock. He never knocked at his mother's house because he viewed her property, and everything inside it, as his eventual rightful inheritance. He stormed into the kitchen, his face flushed red with a volatile mixture of altitude sickness, travel fatigue, and pure, unfiltered greed. Brenda was right behind him, her eyes darting around the room, instantly locking onto the blue notebook which my grandmother had purposefully left resting on the center of the table. "What did you let her sign?" Richard barked, not even acknowledging my presence. He marched over and stood directly over my grandmother, using his height to try and intimidate an elderly woman in her own home, a tactic he had used in boardrooms for decades. "Hello, Richard. How was the flight? Did you enjoy the engagement party?" My grandmother asked mildly, not taking a single step back. "Do not play games with me, Mom. Loretta said 2 corporate suits were in this house for 2 solid hours this morning. What did you do? What did you give away?" I stepped forward, placing myself physically between him and the table. "She sold the licensing rights to the Bluebird recipes," I said, keeping my voice dead even, refusing to match his aggressive energy. "To Ashford Foods. The deal is closed. The paperwork is finalized." My mother let out a loud, highly dramatic gasp, pressing her manicured hand to her chest as if she were in a soap opera. "You sold the family legacy to strangers? Without consulting your own son? Without consulting the family's financial best interests? It is my legacy, Brenda," my grandmother replied, her voice cutting through the room like a cold knife. I built it. Earl built it. You two spent 30 years pretending it did not exist because it smelled like onions and grease. You told your country club friends I was retired, not running a diner. Do not pretend you care about the legacy now. Richard slammed his heavy hand on the table, rattling the coffee cups and making the spoons jump. That book belongs to this family. It does not belong to your whims. You have been isolated. You are confused. People take advantage of old women living alone, especially when they are not thinking clearly. He turned his full, venomous rage on me, pointing a finger directly at my chest. And you facilitated this. You manipulated a vulnerable old lady to grab a piece of the pie because you are bitter about your own failures. You think because you flip burgers for a living you deserve a seat at the adult table? You think you can steal from your own family? I looked at him, really looked at him. The man who refused to pay for my education, who skipped my graduation, was now looking me in the eye and accusing me of financial manipulation. She was perfectly fine and capable when you left her a frozen TV dinner yesterday morning, I said, my voice rising just enough to command the room. You were in this house at 7:52. You left her garbage, you did not even turn on the microwave, and you got on a plane. Now suddenly she is vulnerable and you are her fierce protector. Brenda stepped forward, realizing aggression was failing. Her voice dropped into that fake, soothing, deeply manipulative tone she used when she wanted to control a narrative. Declan, sweetheart, you do not understand corporate business. We are trying to keep this family together. We are trying to protect her hard-earned assets. If she signs something under duress, we can fix it. But we need to take control of the situation immediately. Richard nodded, crossing his arms over his expensive sweater. He delivered his ultimatum, laying his cards on the table. You are going to call those men back right now. You are going to tell them she is not in her right mind and the deal is off. If you do not, I will get a lawyer this afternoon. I will file for an emergency conservatorship. I will have a judge declare her mentally incompetent, take full legal custody of her affairs, and void that contract. Do not make me drag my own mother through a humiliating public medical evaluation. Just give me the paperwork. He smiled, a cold, calculating corporate smile. He truly thought he had us trapped in a corner. He thought the threat of a public, messy court battle over her sanity, a process that would strip her of her dignity, would force us to fold immediately. He was relying on the fact that decent people hate conflict and will surrender to avoid a scene. My grandmother did not flinch. She slowly reached into the deep pocket of her knitted cardigan. She did not look scared. She looked entirely bored, like a chess master waiting for an opponent to realize they were in checkmate. She pulled out a thick, sealed envelope and tossed it onto the table. It slid right in front of my father, hitting his hand. Open it, she said. Richard frowned, picking up the envelope. He tore it open and pulled out a stack of dense medical documents. I watched his eyes frantically scan the top page. I watched the arrogant, triumphant smirk melt right off his face, replaced by a pale, twitching realization of absolute defeat. It was a comprehensive psychological, cognitive, and neurological evaluation, dated exactly 1 month ago, conducted by the top neurologist in the entire state. The report concluded in absolute, undeniable medical terminology that Clara was exceptionally sharp, fully competent, and possessed total executive function. It stated clearly she was capable of making complex financial and legal decisions without any undue influence. I saw a specialist on purpose, Richard, my grandmother said, her voice turning into unbreakable steel. I knew exactly what you would try to do. I knew you would try to weaponize my age and claim I was losing my mind. That document is legally bulletproof. Bring your lawyer. Bring a judge. They will laugh you out of the courtroom, and I will countersue you for harassment. My mother snatched the heavy stack of papers from his hands, reading them frantically, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. This is a setup. You planned this entire thing behind our backs to make us look foolish. You planned a week in Aspen behind mine. Clara shot back without missing a beat. Now get out of my kitchen. Both of you. They had absolutely no leverage left. The medical threat, their trump card, was dead on arrival. Richard looked at me with a hatred so pure, so concentrated. It was almost physical. You think you won? He spat, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. You think you can steal from your own blood and walk away clean? I will ruin you, Declan. I will make sure everyone in this family, everyone in this town, knows exactly what you did here today. They turned and marched out, slamming the door so hard the hinges groaned. The Porsche tires squealed aggressively as they reversed blindly down the driveway. I let out a massive breath I did not know I was holding, leaning against the counter. The immediate physical threat was gone, but I knew my father's playbook. When he loses a legal battle, he starts a scorched earth social war. Sure enough, barely an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Aunt Sylvia, my father's sister. Sylvia had always played the neutral peacemaker in the family, the one who sent birthday cards and checked in. She texted me, "Declan, honey, I heard there was a terrible misunderstanding this morning. Is Grandma okay? Your dad is very upset and worried about her safety." I typed back a brief, highly polite response saying Grandma was perfectly fine, healthy, and handling her own business affairs as she always had. 10 minutes later, Sylvia replied with a broken heart emoji and a message saying she was praying for peace. I thought she was being sympathetic. I thought I had an ally. I was so incredibly wrong. The smear campaign launched with the terrifying efficiency of a military operation. By the time I woke up the next morning, my phone was a toxic wasteland of notifications. My parents had weaponized the extended family group chats, private Facebook pages, and local community boards. They spun a masterful, incredibly damaging narrative. According to the story, they were furiously typing out to everyone who would listen. I was a failing, bitter chef drowning in debt who had preyed on an elderly woman's brief moments of confusion. They claimed I brought in shady corporate vultures while they were out of town to steal her life savings and her brand. Cousins I had not spoken to in nearly a decade were sending me multi-paragraph text messages about how disgusted they were with my greed. A woman I went to high school with commented on a public post saying she hoped the police would investigate me. The most painful part was discovering exactly how the information was flowing. I got a text from a younger cousin that accidentally included a screenshot of my private conversation with Aunt Sylvia. Sylvia, the sweet, praying peacemaker, had been screenshotting every single word I said in confidence and feeding it directly to my mother to fuel their twisted narrative. She was a mole. The betrayal stung deeply, but it also clarified things beautifully. I stopped defending myself. I stopped replying to the hateful texts. I put my phone on silent, tossed it on my bed, and let them scream into the void. But my parents were not satisfied with ruining my standing in the family. They escalated. If they could not take the Ashford contract, they decided to completely destroy my livelihood. I was at the restaurant, prepping for the massive Friday lunch service, slicing through pounds of onions, when Chef Gordon called me into his cramped office. Gordon is a massive, no-nonsense guy who values hard work over everything and has zero patience for drama. He was staring intensely at his computer monitor, his jaw tight. "Declan, close the door and sit down," he said gruffly. He turned the bright monitor toward me. It was a long email from Brenda. My own mother had taken the time to write a formal, multi-paragraph email to my boss, CCing the restaurant's general manager. She claimed I was undergoing a severe, unstable mental health crisis, that I was actively involved in a police investigation for elder financial abuse, and that keeping me on staff would be a massive legal and public relations liability for the restaurant's reputation. She actually used the words impending lawsuit and theft. I felt the blood drain entirely from my face. My stomach dropped. I stood there, deeply humiliated, waiting for Gordon to ask for my keys and tell me to pack up my knives. Instead, Gordon leaned forward, looked at the screen, and hit the delete button on his keyboard with tremendous force. "Your mother seems like a real piece of work," Gordon grunted, crossing his massive arms. "She called the front desk here twice this morning before she sent the email, demanding to speak to management. I told her I don't give a damn about your family drama as long as the prep is done and the food goes out hot. But you need to know, Declan, they are actively trying to burn your house down. Watch your back. If you need a lawyer, I know a guy. Gordon's unwavering loyalty gave me the solid anchor I desperately needed. I walked out of that office with a completely new kind of clarity. I was done being the silent victim. I was done taking the high road while they dragged my name through the mud. Later that afternoon, during my break, I got a phone call from an unknown local number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Declan? It's Martha. Martha had been a head waitress at the Bluebird Diner for 25 years. She was a chain-smoking, tough-as-nails woman who knew every single secret in our town and took absolutely zero nonsense from anyone. She told me to meet her immediately at a different diner 2 towns over, a place where nobody would recognize us. When I slid into the cracked vinyl booth across from her, she did not bother with small talk or pleasantries. She slid a thick, yellowed manila folder across the sticky laminate table. Your dad is running his mouth, telling everyone you stole from your grandmother, Martha said, taking a long sip of bitter black coffee. He is calling you a thief to anyone who will listen. I think you need to know what a real thief looks like. Open it. I opened the folder. Inside was a photocopy of a highly detailed draft contract. The date printed clearly at the top was from October 2016. 8 years ago, the contract was drawn up between Richard and Holbrook Foods, Ashford's absolute biggest competitor in the retail grocery space. I read through the dense legal jargon, my eyes widening with every paragraph. It was a formal agreement to transfer the proprietary rights of the Bluebird recipes, the name, and the branding to Holbrook for a massive lump sum payment directed into an account controlled solely by Richard. I found that in the office fax machine back in 2016, Martha said quietly, leaning across the table. Your father tried to sell the recipes behind Clara's back. He was secretly negotiating with Holbrook executives while your grandfather was in the hospital, sick and dying. He was going to steal the whole damn thing and leave her with nothing. I stared at the final page at the signature line. Richard's full legal name was printed there, alongside the signature of a Holbrook VP. Did my grandmother know about this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, struggling to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. Of course she knew, Martha said, her eyes flashing with old anger. I showed the facts to her myself. She confronted him and shut the deal down quietly to avoid a public scandal that would have destroyed the family business. She protected him. She kept his disgusting secret for 8 long years, and he repaid her by treating her like absolute garbage. Take the paper, Declan. Keep it safe. And when the time is right, use it to bury him. I drove back to my apartment with the 2016 contract sitting on my passenger seat like an unexploded bomb. The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of my parents was staggering. They were actively destroying my reputation for allegedly doing exactly what my father had actually verifiably tried to do 8 years prior. As I walked into my quiet apartment, my phone rang. It was Preston, the golden child. I answered it, my blood running cold. Declan, what the hell is going on? Preston's voice was frantic, completely lacking its usual polished, arrogant confidence. Dad's talking about suing Ashford. Mom is crying nonstop. Her country club friends are asking incredibly embarrassing questions. Fix this. Give them whatever they want so they stop ruining my engagement week. You are being entirely unreasonable. He did not care about the truth. He did not care about Grandma. He only cared that his perfect, curated aesthetic was being disrupted by family drama. I cannot fix it, Preston, I said coldly, feeling a new sense of absolute power. Because nothing is broken. Tell Dad I will see him at the Ashford homecoming event next Saturday. Tell him to bring his best suit, because the cameras will be there. I hung up before he could respond, ending the call on his desperate stammering. I laid the 2016 Holbrook contract on my kitchen counter, smoothing out the creases. The corporate launch event was scheduled for next Saturday at the old diner. The entire town, including the local press, was invited. My parents would undoubtedly show up to play the heartbroken victims in front of a massive audience. They desperately wanted a public stage to shame me. They were going to get exactly what they wanted, but they had absolutely no idea I was bringing a loaded gun to a knife fight. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp, clear blue sky that makes small Midwestern towns look like vintage postcards. The air was cool and sharp, carrying the faint, earthy smell of pine trees and upcoming spring rain. The old Bluebird Diner had been closed for regular daily service for a few years, operating only occasionally for private events. But today, Ashford Foods had transformed the cracked asphalt parking lot and the retro interior into a massive, highly orchestrated corporate launch event. They had strung up heavy, expensive canvas banners across the front awning, set up professional tasting stations with gleaming silver chafing dishes, and invited the entire town to celebrate the brand's national debut. My grandmother, Clara, was the undisputed guest of honor. The local media was out in full force, including Simon, the veteran investigative reporter from the county paper who had covered local news, town hall meetings, and local business developments for 30 relentless years. Simon was not a gossip columnist looking for cheap clicks. He was a hard-nosed, old-school journalist who cared deeply about verifiable facts, and his presence added a layer of serious, undeniable weight to the morning. I arrived at the diner 3 hours early to help coordinate the professional catering staff Ashford Foods had hired for the day. Walking into that diner felt like stepping into a perfectly preserved time machine. The air smelled exactly the way it did when I was 9 years old. It was a perfect, intoxicating blend of roasted garlic, hot melted butter, fresh ground coffee, and the faint, nostalgic scent of the old red vinyl booths. On the front counter, arranged in perfect, symmetrical pyramids under the warm glow of the pendant lights, were the first official prototypes of the retail grocery line. The packaging was a beautiful, deep navy blue, identical to the exact shade of the diner's iconic front door. Right across the front of every single box, printed in a customized font that perfectly mimicked my grandmother's distinct, elegant handwriting, were the words Clara's Kitchen. It was absolutely stunning. It was a massive corporate rollout, but it felt deeply personal. It felt like 30 years of hard, invisible labor finally being dragged into the bright light of public recognition. It felt like absolute justice. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the diner was absolutely packed beyond its legal fire code capacity. People were standing 3 deep along the heavy oak counter and squeezing tightly into the booths. Loretta, the notoriously nosy neighbor who had started this entire firestorm with her text message to my parents, was holding court near the glass pie case. She was wearing a bright floral dress and whispering aggressively to anyone who would listen, her eyes darting around the room. Former waitresses who used to work double shifts, old regular customers who used to drink black coffee here every single morning before their factory shifts, and local business owners were all talking over each other, eating hot samples of gravy and biscuits and celebrating Clara. I stood near the swinging wooden kitchen doors, watching my grandmother sitting proudly in my grandfather Earl's old corner booth. She looked completely radiant. She was wearing a beautiful silk blouse, smiling warmly and shaking hands with people she had fed through devastating factory layoffs, terrible winter storms, and profound personal tragedies. She looked like the undisputed queen of the county, finally receiving her crown. Then, the heavy blue front door swung open, and the temperature in the crowded room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. My father Richard, my mother Brenda, and my brother Preston walked in. They did not just walk in. They made a highly calculated entrance. They were dressed like they were attending a high-end commercial real estate seminar or an exclusive country club board meeting. Richard was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored navy suit with a silk tie that screamed generational wealth. Brenda had on a beige designer trench coat, her hair perfectly blown out, wearing a heavy string of authentic pearls. Preston was standing right behind them, looking slightly nervous but trying his absolute best to project the golden child confidence he had been raised to weaponize against the world. They had come to stage a hostile takeover of the narrative. They had spent the entire week aggressively spreading vicious lies about me on community message boards and at HOA meetings, claiming I was guilty of severe elder abuse and attempting to steal her estate through fraudulent means. Now, they were here to play the heartbroken, protective, wealthy family in front of the local cameras and the town's most influential residents. I leaned against the kitchen doorframe and watched Richard work the room. It was honestly a terrifying masterclass in psychological manipulation. He did not come in yelling or causing a public scene. He came in looking deeply concerned, playing the role of the weary patriarch carrying a heavy, tragic burden. I saw him walk directly over to Simon the reporter. Richard placed a firm, masculine hand on Simon's shoulder, leaned in close, and spoke in a low, serious tone. He was actively weaving his fabricated story. He was telling anyone who would listen that he was just trying to fiercely protect his elderly, vulnerable mother from corporate sharks and a deeply troubled, financially desperate grandson who had completely lost his way. He dropped heavy legal buzzwords deliberately, loudly mentioning protective custody, estate planning, and unwavering family loyalty. Brenda was doing the exact same thing near the tasting tables. She was dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a monogram tissue, telling Loretta and the local bank manager that they had to abruptly cancel Preston's lavish engagement week in Aspen, abandoning their non-refundable deposits because of the terrible, unexpected family crisis I had selfishly caused. They truly thought they had already won the war. They thought the immense social pressure of the entire town looking at me with suspicion would force me to back down, panic, and voluntarily hand over the Ashford contract just to save my own reputation from total ruin. They thought I would crumble under the crushing weight of their carefully constructed lies, just like I had crumbled when they took my college fund years ago. I did not crumble. I just stood by the kitchen doors, my arms casually crossed over my chest, feeling the heavy, thick manila folder tucked safely into the inside breast pocket of my jacket. The trap was beautifully set. They were walking right into it, completely blinded by their own towering, unchecked arrogance. Harrison, the lead Ashford Foods executive, walked to the front of the room and tapped the microphone. The high-pitched feedback caused the chatter to die down immediately. Harrison gave a highly polished, deeply respectful speech about the enduring legacy of the Bluebird Diner. He talked about corporate authenticity, the immense value of real, hard-working American families, and the rich history of Clara's recipes. He pointed to the blue packages stacked on the counter, explaining that Clara's life work would soon be on shelves in thousands of grocery stores nationwide. He then formally announced that Clara had legally appointed me, Declan, as the custodian of recipes. He explicitly explained to the crowd that this meant I was guaranteed a massive corporate salary and full brand control to ensure the food never lost its soul, completely bypassing any other family members or third-party brokers. The crowd politely clapped, but I could physically feel the thick, uncomfortable tension in the room. The toxic whispers my parents had planted all week had done their intended damage. People were looking at me sideways, whispering behind their hands, questioning my motives. The applause was scattered, hesitant, and unsure. Before Harrison could hand the microphone to my grandmother to say a few words, Richard made his move. He stepped out of the crowd, projecting an aura of absolute, undeniable patriarchal authority. He walked right up to Harrison, smiled a tight, aggressive, corporate smile, and essentially ripped the microphone directly from the executive's hand. He turned to face the dense crowd of 80 people. The room went completely, uncomfortably silent. You could hear a pin drop. "Thank you all for being here today," Richard said, his deep, commanding voice echoing perfectly through the small diner's acoustics. "My mother, Clara, is a pillar of this community. My father, Earl, built this place from the ground up with his bare hands and relentless sweat. And as the head of this family, it is my absolute, God-given duty to protect their legacy from those who wish to exploit it." He paused dramatically, letting the heavy silence hang over the room to maximize the theatrical effect. He looked directly at me standing by the kitchen doors. His eyes were cold, flat, and full of absolute venom. Unfortunately, we all know that when a significant inheritance or a massive sum of corporate money is involved, certain individuals see a golden opportunity. They take advantage of advanced age, They ruthlessly take advantage of familial trust. My family has been put through a living nightmare this past week. We have had to consult a senior estate lawyer to discuss protective legal custody of my mother's assets. We had to do this because her grandson, Declan, decided to bypass the family entirely and orchestrate a backroom, predatory deal for his own selfish financial gain. A low, shocked murmur rippled through the vinyl booths. Brenda nodded solemnly from the front row, playing the grieving, devastated mother to absolute perfection. Preston looked down at his expensive leather shoes, refusing to make eye contact with anyone in the room. Richard was going in for the absolute kill. He was trying to publicly shame me so severely, painting me as a criminal mastermind who preyed on the elderly, that Ashford Foods would have no choice but to void my employment contract right then and there to avoid a massive, brand-destroying public relations disaster. "We are a strong, united family," Richard continued, his voice thick with highly rehearsed, entirely fake emotion. "We will not let corporate greed or a troubled, bitter young man's jealousy destroy what Earl and Clara built. We just want my mother safe, we want her protected, and we want the absolute truth to be known to this community today." He lowered the microphone, looking incredibly satisfied with himself. He thought he had just delivered the final, fatal blow to my life. He expected me to run out the back door in tears of humiliation. He expected my grandmother to sit in her booth, silent, confused, and defeated by his overwhelming, domineering authority. He had absolutely no idea what was about to happen. I did not run. I did not yell. I did not break a single bead of sweat. I uncrossed my arms and walked out from the kitchen doors with a slow, deliberate, terrifyingly calm pace. The dense crowd parted for me slightly, their faces a complex mixture of harsh judgment and intense, burning curiosity. I walked right up to my father. I reached out, grabbed the heavy metal microphone, and pulled it from his hand. He gripped the handle for a second, his knuckles turning white as he aggressively tried to hold on. But I yanked it away with a sudden, violent force that genuinely surprised him and threw him off balance. I turned my back to him completely, dismissing his presence entirely, and faced the crowded room. I looked directly at Simon the reporter, who had his pen poised eagerly over his notepad, ready to document the fallout. I looked at Loretta. I looked at my mother, whose fake, theatrical tears had suddenly dried up, replaced by a look of sudden, sharp apprehension. "My father talks a whole lot about protection," I said, my voice steady, deep, and amplified loudly through the diner's vintage speakers. "He talks endlessly about being the strong, moral head of the family. He tells you I took advantage of my grandmother while he was out of town. He tells you I am a thief who preys on the elderly. So, let us talk about the actual, verifiable timeline of events." I reached into my left pants pocket. I pulled out the crumpled grocery store receipt from the Salisbury steak dinner. "Last Tuesday was Clara's 79th birthday," I said, holding the small piece of thermal paper high in the air for the entire room to see. "My father claims he got stuck out of town on urgent business and could not be here to protect her. But this is a receipt for a generic frozen microwave dinner. The timestamp printed clearly on this receipt is exactly 7:52 in the morning on the day of her birthday. My parents were standing inside this very house at 7:52. I pulled out my phone with my other hand, opening the screenshot of the family group chat. I held the bright screen up toward Simon and the Ashford executives so they could clearly see the images. At exactly 10 o'clock that exact same morning, my mother posted a photo of a luxury boarding gate at the international airport. My parents dropped a rock-hard, frozen dinner on a kitchen table that fed half this town. They did not even bother to turn on the microwave to heat it up. They abandoned an elderly woman on her birthday to fly to Aspen for a luxury vacation. They did not care about her safety. They did not care about her legacy. They only came rushing back because they smelled a multi-million-dollar paycheck slipping through their greedy fingers. The murmur in the crowd instantly changed frequency. It was no longer a murmur of suspicion directed toward me. It was a low, aggressive, rumbling murmur of profound disgust directed entirely at Richard and Brenda. In a working-class town like ours, Disrespecting your elderly mother on her birthday, treating her like an absolute burden, is an unforgivable social crime. Richard's face flushed a deep, angry, mottled purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his expensive silk collar. "That is a private family matter," Richard barked, stepping aggressively toward me, trying to physically intimidate me into silence, relying on decades of bullying tactics. "You are twisting the facts to cover up your own massive financial theft. This has absolutely nothing to do with a birthday dinner." "You are exactly right," I said, my voice cutting sharply and cleanly over his, refusing to give up the floor or step back an inch. "It has everything to do with financial theft. You just happen to be pointing your finger at the wrong thief." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out the thick, yellowed manila folder Martha had given me at the diner 2 towns over. The room felt completely electrified. Nobody was breathing. You could hear the low hum of the old commercial refrigerators in the back kitchen. I opened the folder and took out the stapled, photocopied legal contract from 2016. "You stand here in my grandfather's diner, holding a microphone, talking about protecting his legacy from me," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, crystal-clear clarity that demanded total attention. "You loudly accuse me of selling out the family behind your back to Ashford Foods. But what you conveniently did not tell your country club friends, what you absolutely did not tell the HOA board, is what you did 8 years ago." I unfolded the paper and held it up directly in front of my father's face, forcing him to look at it, then turned it toward the crowd for everyone to see. "This is a formal legal draft contract between Richard Hills and Holbrook Foods, Ashford's absolute biggest market competitor, dated October 2016. Exactly 8 years ago, while my grandfather Earl was in the hospital, actively dying from heart failure, my father secretly negotiated to sell the proprietary rights, the brand name, and the real estate of the Bluebird Diner to a massive corporation. He tried to steal the recipes out from under his own mother while she was sitting by her dying husband's hospital bed holding his hand. The silence in the diner was deafening and absolute. It was the kind of terrifying, suffocating silence that happens right after a severe car crash, right before the screaming starts. Brenda let out a loud, strangled gasp, covering her mouth with her manicured hand, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. Richard actually took a physical step backward, his polished, untouchable facade cracking into a million jagged pieces in real time. "That is a complete lie," Richard shouted, but his voice cracked horribly, betraying his deep panic. He pointed a shaking, desperate finger at me. "That is a forgery. You forged that document to ruin me. You are insanely jealous." "It is not a forgery," a voice called out from the very back of the room. The dense crowd parted like the Red Sea. Everyone turned around, craning their necks to see who had spoken. It was Preston, my younger brother, the undeniable golden child, the one who had spent his entire life benefiting directly from my parents' blatant favoritism and endless financial backing. Preston looked physically sick to his stomach. His skin was pale green, he was sweating profusely through his expensive dress shirt, and his hands were shaking violently. He walked slowly down the center aisle, past the crowded vinyl booths, right up to the front counter. He did not look at our parents. He looked at me, and then he looked deeply at Clara, who was watching him with steady, knowing eyes. Preston reached into his expensive leather briefcase with a trembling hand. He pulled out a heavy, cream-colored legal document. It had a thick blue legal cover attached securely to the back. "Declan only has the photocopy," Preston said, his voice trembling intensely but loud enough for the entire silent room to hear clearly. "I have the original." Preston placed the original 2016 contract heavily on the counter, right next to the blue Ashford packaging. He flipped past the dense terms and conditions directly to the final signature page, exposing the fresh ink. "Dad kept the original copy in his home office safe," Preston said, finally turning to look directly at our father. The absolute betrayal radiating in the room was palpable. "He made me a legal signee on the escrow account when I turned 18. He told me the massive payout from the secret deal was going to fully fund my college tuition, my first house, my entire adult life. He told me Grandma was getting too old and confused, and we had to take what was rightfully ours before she wasted it on medical bills or charity. I knew about it. I knew he tried to steal it, and I stayed completely quiet because I liked the money. I liked the cars. I liked being the favorite son. Preston broke down in heavy, ugly, gasping tears, burying his face in his hands, leaning heavily against the counter for physical support. The golden child had just detonated the ultimate, undeniable nuclear bomb on his own parents. My father stood frozen in place, trapped in a nightmare of his own making with no exits. The man who had built his entire identity on being morally superior, on being the untouchable, wealthy head of the family, was completely, publicly exposed as a fraud and a predator. He had aggressively accused me of elder abuse while standing in front of a room full of local voters and media, holding the exact document proving he was the actual, undeniable villain. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The fallout inside the diner was immediate, visceral, and absolutely catastrophic for my parents. The crowd, made up of hard-working people who had known and respected my family for generations, turned on them with a fierce, collective disgust that was almost frightening to witness. The atmosphere shifted instantly from a joyous celebration to a brutal public tribunal. Loretta the neighbor, who had initially fueled their lies, now crossed her arms, scowled deeply, and openly glared at Brenda, shaking her head in pure, unfiltered judgment. Simon the reporter was writing furiously in his notepad, capturing every single word of the public humiliation, knowing with absolute certainty he had just been handed the front-page story of the decade for the county paper. Richard looked wildly around the crowded room, his chest heaving under his tailored suit, desperately searching for a single friendly face, a single ally to back him up or offer him a lifeline. He found absolutely none. The Ashford Foods executives, Harrison and Vaughn, stood behind the counter with expressions of pure, unadulterated ice. They were high-level corporate fixers who dealt with millions of dollars daily. They had just witnessed a local real estate broker aggressively try to sabotage a multi-million-dollar corporate launch, only to be brutally exposed as a fraud and an attempted thief by his own 2 sons. They mentally crossed his name off any future dealings forever. "This is a massive, coordinated setup," Richard muttered, his voice weak, pathetic, and entirely stripped of its former booming power. "You are all against me. You are all crazy. You do not understand complex business transactions." He grabbed Brenda roughly by the arm, gripping the fabric of her expensive trench coat. "We are leaving right now. We are calling our senior legal team. I will hit every single one of you with a defamation lawsuit so massive you will never financially recover. I will own this entire town." It was an entirely empty, desperate, pathetic threat, and every single person in the room knew it. You absolutely cannot sue someone for defamation when they are telling the objective, verifiable truth, backed up by original, ink-signed legal documents presented in front of 80 witnesses. Richard and Brenda essentially fled the scene. They practically ran down the center aisle, pushing aggressively past the former waitresses and town locals who refused to step out of their way, bumping into tables and chairs. They burst out the heavy front doors and practically sprinted across the cracked asphalt parking lot, looking like common criminals fleeing a crime scene. The loud, aggressive roar of their rented luxury Porsche starting up sounded like a desperate, cowardly retreat rather than a display of wealth and dominance. They peeled out of the lot, running a stop sign at the corner, leaving a thick cloud of dust and the total, irreversible ruin of their reputation behind them in the diner. The diner remained intensely quiet for a long, heavy moment after they left. The thick, suffocating tension slowly evaporated, replaced by a profound sense of relief and justice. Then, my grandmother Clara stood up slowly from her corner booth. She smoothed down the front of her floral silk blouse, walked slowly over to the front counter with quiet dignity, and placed her small, wrinkled hand firmly on Preston's shaking shoulder. Preston was still crying heavily, completely shattered by the immense weight of his own public confession and the realization of what he had just destroyed. "You did the right thing today, Preston?" Clara said softly, her voice carrying a deep, complicated mercy that only a grandmother could possess. "It took you 8 long years to find your courage, but you finally told the truth when it mattered most." The rest of the homecoming event proceeded, but the core atmosphere had completely shifted. It was no longer just a corporate grocery launch. It was a massive, communal celebration of justice and survival against family toxicity. The town rallied heavily around Clara and me. People I had not spoken to in years, people who had read Brenda's vicious Facebook posts and believed them, came up and firmly shook my hand, apologizing profusely for believing the vicious rumors my parents had spread. Simon the reporter pulled me aside before leaving and told me the story would be on the front page of the Sunday County paper, and he absolutely kept his word. The investigative article dropped the very next morning, and it was devastating. Simon was a brilliant, ruthless writer when it came to exposing hypocrisy in local elites. He laid out the entire timeline with surgical precision. He mentioned the exact timestamp of the frozen microwave dinner. He detailed the failed 2016 Hallbrook deal, explicitly explaining the financial betrayal against a dying man and his wife. He directly quoted Richard's public accusations in the diner and described the exact, dramatic moment Preston handed over the original signed documents. The article did not just stay in our small town. It was quickly picked up by the larger regional papers across the entire state. The social exile of Richard and Brenda was absolute, brutal, and breathtakingly swift. My parents had spent 30 years meticulously cultivating a pristine, wealthy image among the local elite. They were obsessed with their high-tier country club status, their aggressive HOA meetings, and hosting lavish, exclusive dinner parties. Within one single week, all of it was burned entirely to the ground. Brenda was politely but firmly asked to step down immediately from the charity board she chaired, effectively erasing her social standing overnight. Richard's lucrative real estate clients suddenly started transferring their massive accounts to other local brokers en masse, officially citing a total lack of ethical trust and fiduciary responsibility. They became absolute social pariahs. They could not even walk into the local grocery store or the pharmacy without people pointing, whispering, and turning their backs in disgust. The people who only show up when the lights are bright and the money is flowing are always the first ones to run away when the darkness falls. Preston's life also took a massive, devastating hit, but to his immense credit, he stayed to face the music instead of running away. His wealthy fiancée's powerful family read the newspaper article and immediately called off the engagement, completely horrified by the public scandal and the verified fact that Preston had been legally complicit in an attempted theft against his own grandmother. Preston lost his fancy Aspen wedding, his future powerful in-laws, and his lifelong golden child status all in one grueling weekend. But instead of running away to hide in a luxury condo or begging Richard for money, he drove his car to Clara's house. He knocked on the door, stood on the porch with his head hung low in genuine shame, and begged for a second chance to be part of the real family. Clara did not hand out forgiveness like cheap party favors. She looked at him from the doorway, her face stern, and said, "You can earn your way back into this family, Preston, one shift at a time." She handed him a heavy, industrial canvas apron. The golden child, the man with the expensive private university business degree who used to openly mock my culinary career, spent the next 6 months in the sweltering back of the newly reopened diner kitchen. He washed dishes, scrubbed horrific grease traps, and peeled 50 pounds of potatoes a day. He did not complain once. He just put his head down and did the hard work. 2 weeks after the catastrophic, life-altering showdown at the diner, my cell phone rang. I looked at the caller ID on the bright screen. It was Richard. I stared at the screen and let it ring until it went to voicemail. He called back immediately, desperate and persistent. I finally answered, pressing the green button and putting him on speakerphone while I stood in my quiet kitchen preparing my morning coffee. "Declan," he said. His voice was entirely stripped of its usual booming, arrogant confidence. He sounded exhausted, old, and completely hollow. He sounded exactly like a man who had lost everything that actually mattered to him, which was his public reputation, his social standing, and his access to money. "What do you want, Richard?" I asked flatly, pouring hot water slowly over my coffee grounds, refusing to give him any emotional reaction. "We are still family," he pleaded, desperately trying to find a solid footing in a world that had completely rejected him. "This whole thing has gone entirely too far. The town is actively crucifying us. Your mother cannot even show her face at the pharmacy without someone making a snide comment. We need to issue a joint public statement. We need to present a united front to the media to calm this down. And we need to discuss a fair, reasonable arrangement regarding the Ashford corporate contract. I am still her son. I deserve a salary, a consulting fee, or a small cut of the royalties, just to keep things fair and keep the family intact. We can put this all behind us." The absolute terrifying delusion of the man was staggering. He had actively tried to frame me for elder abuse, tried to get me fired from my job, tried to steal a multi-million-dollar brand from his own dying father, and he still legitimately thought he was entitled to a paycheck for his troubles. I set my coffee mug heavily on the granite counter. I channeled every single ounce of strength, resilience, and quiet power my grandmother had ever taught me over those long Sunday afternoons in her kitchen. "Listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice completely devoid of anger, operating purely on cold, hard facts. "You are not getting a public statement. You are not getting a consulting salary. You are not getting a single dime from the Ashford deal or the real estate properties. If you or Brenda ever attempt to contact me, if you ever step foot near Clara, or if you ever harass Gordon at the restaurant again, I will personally fund a civil lawsuit against you for defamation, harassment, and emotional distress that will completely bankrupt whatever retirement savings you have left. The boundary is permanently drawn. Do not ever cross it." I hung up the phone. I opened my settings and permanently blocked his number. I blocked Brenda's number. I blocked Aunt Sylvia and every other toxic relative who had sided with them during their smear campaign. The exact moment I pressed block, I felt a massive, invisible weight physically lift off my shoulders and chest. I was finally permanently free from the deeply toxic obligation of being their emotional punching bag and their reliable backup plan. A month later, the Ashford retail line officially hit major grocery store shelves across the entire country. It was a massive, undeniable commercial success. The authentic gravy packets, the frozen biscuit dough, and the signature marinades sold out in 3 days in most markets. The national reviews universally praised the real, home-cooked flavor. I formally quit my grueling job at Gordon's restaurant, though Gordon threw me a massive, rowdy going-away party with the entire kitchen staff, and I stepped fully into my new, highly paid corporate role as custodian of recipes. I spent my days flying to massive production facilities across the Midwest, tasting large batches, adjusting spice ratios, and fiercely ensuring that every single product holding Clara's name tasted exactly like a Sunday morning in 1995. I protected her legacy with my life, just as she had trusted me to do. On a quiet, warm Tuesday evening in late May, I went over to Clara's house for dinner. The diner was closed for the day. Preston was there, his hands raw and blistered from washing industrial dishes, quietly setting the table with plates and silverware. He looked tired, but he looked real. The arrogance was entirely gone. Clara had cooked the meal herself. After we ate a massive dinner of roast chicken and vegetables, Clara stood up slowly and walked over to the old oak hutch in the dining room. She pulled a small brass key from her pocket, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out the faded blue notebook. She walked back to the table, but she did not just open it to show me a single page like she used to. She placed the entire heavy, grease-stained book directly into my open hands. "It was never just about who legally owns the brand, Declan," she said, looking at me with eyes that held a lifetime of survival, grief, and immense wisdom. "It is about who keeps the fire alive when things get dark. It belongs to you now. You earned it." I opened the heavy cover. The pages were perfectly worn, stained with decades of butter, flour, and absolute love. I flipped past the famous gravy recipe, past the biscuit notes, past the entries my grandfather had scribbled in the margins before his funeral. I turned all the way to the very last page. There, written in fresh blue ink, the handwriting slightly shaky from her age, but perfectly legible and deliberate, was a brand new recipe. It was a complex, beautiful, intricate recipe for a slow-roasted beef brisket, utilizing techniques I had shown her months ago. At the very top of the page, underlined twice in bold ink, were the words, Declan's Roast. She had not just given me the legal rights to the brand. She had officially, permanently written me into the core history of our family. She had given me the exact thing I had spent 34 years desperately craving: true, undeniable, permanent validation. I sat at that wooden kitchen table, holding the blue notebook against my chest, and for the absolute first time in my adult life, I cried completely happy tears. The people who only show up when the lights are bright, the cameras are flashing, and the money is flowing will never, ever understand the true value of sitting in the dark, doing the hard, invisible work when nobody is watching. My parents abandoned the most valuable thing in our family because they thought it was just an old, useless woman and a cheap frozen dinner. They threw away solid gold because it was wrapped in a generic cardboard box. Clara knew exactly what they were the whole time, and when the ultimate moment came, she made sure the person who stayed in the kitchen was the one who inherited the kingdom. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I know family trauma, financial betrayal, and emotional abuse are incredibly heavy topics, but I also know how vitally important it is to talk about them openly. We are constantly taught by society to endure abuse and stay quiet just because someone shares our DNA. We are told to forgive and forget for the sake of the family image. But the absolute truth is, you have the fundamental right to set hard boundaries, cut off toxic people, and fiercely protect your own peace and your own future. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to make the terrifying decision to cut off toxic relatives to protect your sanity, your assets, or your own well-being? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and your stories remind all of us that we are not alone in this fight. And please, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and always remember your worth.